Hey, this is Colin Loretz. He's super active in Reno Collective, local entrepreneur, and he has spoken at TEDx this weekend. So, and he's been also the organizer of WordCamps in the past, including 2011, which is my first WordCamp and kind of my introduction to Reno. So it is very satisfying to introduce Colin Loretz.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about APIs and how we can actually consume APIs from within WordPress to talk to other services, similar to what Dylan was kind of talking about, but going a little bit more in depth about what's in WordPress that we can use to do this. And so you can find out more about me, tweet, whatever, at Colin Loretz. I've been doing WordPress development now for, I think, about 8 years. So I've seen everything that's in WordPress. A lot of the stuff that exists today we didn't have available to us when we first started out with WordPress. And so it's been really great to grow with the platform and see it evolve. So how many people have used an API before? Have actually sent it data, pulled in data? Okay, a couple of you. So an API is an application programming interface. You don't have to know that in order to use them. It's just that's some guy decided that's what we're going to call it. We'll use a bunch of acronyms, add it to the PHP, HTML, all that stuff. So and with this, it allows us to send commands to a service that's outside of WordPress or between two different services, and say, you know what, I would like to get something, or I'd like to create something, I'd like to edit or delete something. And so there's two main kinds of APIs that are out there. There are REST APIs and SOAP APIs. There's also, as Dylan mentioned, an XML RPC API, which is what WordPress has inside of WordPress.org when you install that, which allows other apps to actually reach into WordPress and perform actions like creating a new post, creating a new user, things like that. And we're going to be focusing on the REST APIs because they're a lot simpler. So a REST API follows a pattern we'll get to that in a second. A REST API is a little bit simpler in that it almost always has either JSON or XML that is being sent back and forth. With SOAP, it's a lot more complex because you have to create this large XML SOAP envelope. You're passing around these huge pieces of XML back and forth. And it's something that's been around for a long time. REST APIs look like URLs. They're very simple, easy to use. And the developers of those APIs have developed them in a way that, with like the developer, with us in mind, so that we could actually use those as people. And with an API, there's four main verbs. There is get, put, post, and delete. Get is exactly what it sounds like. It's for us to get a list of things. So it's, I want to get a list of posts, or I want to get a list of users. Put is to edit something. Post is to create something or to do some kind of action. So we would do a post if we want to create a new user in WordPress. We would do a put if we want to actually edit that existing user. And then finally, delete allows us to do exactly what it sounds like. Delete a user, delete a post, whatever that might be. So this is an example of an API for Dribbble. Dribbble.com is a website for designers to post like portfolio pieces of things that they're working on. And so the important parts of this is that this is just a URL, but depending on what we send this URL, we can do different things. And so the different component parts of this is the host name of the API. So this is always going to be the same for every call that we make to Dribbble. They've set up their service in a way that this can scale with lots of people hitting it. And then they have what are called resources. So in this case, they call their little posts of what a designer's working on, they call them shots. And so the shot is the resource that we have. If we do just /shots without a number after it, we would get a list of all of the shots. If we put a number after the end of it, you would get that specific shot. If you combine it with those verbs that I was just showing you, like delete or put, you would delete or edit this specific one. So the number ends up being the ID of the resource. So this is shot number 21603. And so these can be used in tandem where instead of shots, you would have users / and the user ID. So to see what that looks like, I'm going to hop out of here for a second. And APIs are very interesting because you can just kind of go through them to see what is possible for you to use. So this is the Dribbble API documentation. And almost any site that has an API, if you go to the bottom of the site or if you go search for their API docs, this is kind of what you'll see. So they have described all of the different verbs that you get to do. And this API is a little bit different in that they don't ever let you create, edit, or delete anything in the API. They only let you get things from this one. So I'm using this as a simple example, but they let you do a get on shots, on rebounds, on players. Players are their users. They're following like a basketball metaphor for their whole site. And you can get the comments. So lots of people have built iPhone apps and other web apps that pull in your portfolio pieces. So the idea here would be that we can actually create a portfolio widget or a portfolio shortcode that uses Dribbble. So this is what Dribbble looks like. And so this is a whole site of all these designs, but using the API, we can get this information. So using my profile, we can actually go in and get all of the shots that I've added in my Dribbble and have those show up in my WordPress site. I could create a plugin that pulls in my Dribbble information. You can give your users some custom plugin settings. So they can say, I want 5 of my latest shots, or I want all of my shots. I want all the shots that have over 10 likes, whatever those different things. We can write those in here. We can go out to Dribbble and pull data in. So if we go back to the docs, you'll see that this is kind of how an API is used, is that we have the verb of get. Where's the laser pointer on this thing? So we have get shots ID, and this is literally what you get back. So you can use curl in your command line, and you would hit this URL, and you would get back all of this information in JSON. And so this is all of the information for this specific shot. This is all of the information for a rebound on a shot, which is just a designer took that shot and decided to do something based on it. And so they provided this way to look at and interact with all of this content. In most of the APIs, you would also have the ability to post a comment, to delete a comment, all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to find the method that allows me to find all of the shots for a specific player. So in this case, this is going to be players / my user ID and then the / shots, which will give me a list of all of the shots that I personally have posted. And what that would look like is I would get a total number of shots that I've done, and then I would get an array of shots. And this has the ID, the title, the URL, all of the stuff that each individual shot in Dribbble has. And so this literally, if you do this in command line, you will get this same information back. This API is really simple in that it doesn't have any authentication, so you don't have to worry about usernames or passwords. And that's because you can't edit or delete anything. But in like the WordPress API, you can't use the XML RPC API without also sending in your username and password for WordPress, because otherwise anyone could delete or create posts inside of WordPress, which would be a very bad thing. And so since WordPress is built on PHP, it used to be that we would have to write all this stuff using the curl equivalent in PHP. We would actually just write straight PHP, straight to Dribbble, and go and ask for this information. But fortunately, WordPress itself makes a lot of calls out to different services for things like Akismet, spam protection, sending those things out to check to see if a comment is spam or not. But it also does a few things where a lot of plugin developers, like plugins for Stripe, log into Facebook, log into Twitter. All of those things are using the Twitter and Facebook API. They're using the Stripe API, the PayPal API. And so there's this HTTP API, which is a little interesting because this is an API inside of WordPress specifically for consuming APIs. And what's nice about this is that you don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting to actually work with APIs. So what this looks like is that we can write PHP code that just looks like this. So instead of example.com, we can put that api.dribble/shots right in there, and we can end up with that same JSON that comes back. When you make an API request, though, you don't just get back that JSON that we saw. You get back a bunch of headers, which are the information about what you just got. You get back a status code. The status code can be from 0 to 500, and 200 being okay, which means we're good, we got our data. 404, can't find it. 500, the server's down, things like that. So with WP Remote Get, we can actually go ahead and pull in information. There's also APIs for WP Remote Post, Remote Put, and Remote Delete. And so you don't have to go underneath the hood and write all of the code to check the status of the status code, the headers, all that stuff, is that WordPress will do that for you. And so because when we do a call to a service, we get back all of these pieces, they have added a bunch of other things in here like WP Remote Retrieve Body. That gets the actual shots from Dribble. You can also do retrieve headers, retrieve status code, and check those things independently.
Can you go back one? That's saying retrieve the body, but get from this URL?
Yeah, so this is going to get the entire, what WP Remote Get gives us is a response. And then in the response, there's a header, a body, a status code. So this is in the WordPress documentation.
I got you. I understand now.
So now $body will be equal to just the body, not the whole thing. And so in another example, we'll actually break this out into two. This is how the WordPress API docs show it as this. But you can break it out and see it a little bit simpler. So if we look at the Dribble API, we can actually take what we were just looking at and pull this into WordPress, and we can do a few things with it. We can either pull it in and create new posts from every single one of these if you're running a portfolio website and you want to have all of those in there as WordPress posts as well. Or you can create a widget that just goes out, and if we haven't had any new images in 12 hours, we can go and just display it in a sidebar and not save it to the database, just have it available for us. And so to do this from the get-go, we would just do this. We would actually instantiate Dribble results somewhere up above this code. And if it was equal to false, we don't have anything yet, we would end up going to go get that information. And when we do that, this is going to return the entire response. It's not going to be just the data like I was talking about. So this is going to be all of my shots inside of Dribble. And the issue with this, so this is what we get back. The issue with this is that every single time this piece of code runs, every time your site loads, if you put this in a function that gets called from a sidebar, this is going to get called out to Dribble every single time every visitor refreshes your page. And that's bad because if you have thousands of people hitting your site, you're going to talk to Dribble thousands of times every single time, even though nothing has changed in Dribble. I haven't posted anything today. There's no real reason that we need to be doing that. And so what we want to do is we actually want to cache this stuff. And what's nice about WordPress is that they have something called WP transients that will allow us to actually store this for a predetermined amount of time that we want, so that we can say, if something has changed, let's go and get it. If it hasn't, then let's just use what we already have. And so what we want to do is we want to cache everything that we get. We want to take that giant blob of JSON that we got and put it into a transient so we can get it later. So what that looks like is that you can set and you can get transients. And these take some getting used to because we've done some projects in the past where you literally have to create the project and build the project the way that you would without using transients and see how many calls it makes, and then build it with transients and make sure that it's only calling when it should. It doesn't. If you don't write it correctly, it's going to go out and make the call anyway. We've done some stuff with weather APIs, and the weather APIs aren't changing all that often, so it's really hard to tell, like, did we go get it from the database or did we go get it from the weather API? But this is what this would look like for us. So we can give it a name, and so I'm giving it CL_dribble shots. And the reason I'm doing this is that this word is up to any developer can create a transient. So CL is my initials, so I'm just putting a namespace before it so that I am pretty certain that there's not another developer, another plugin, another thing that's going to be using the same namespace as me. And then I'm taking this variable of dribble JSON and putting that into the transient. And then the last number is the number of seconds that we want to keep it for. So this will actually be for 12 hours. And what that just means is that it'll expire after 12 hours. And we can check to see if it's still valid.
That'd be a kick-ass license plate, 606012. That'd be awesome.
And so we can then get that. So if we do a get on the same name, if there's something in there, we'll get back that dribble JSON. If we don't have anything there, we're going to have false. And so in that original code where we said if dribble JSON equals false, then we're going to go get that. We can actually use those here. So to put that all together, this is what all of the code would look like to check to see if we've had the data recently. So we have get transient dribble shots. This is checking to see have we had data from dribble in the past. If we don't, then what we want to do is we want to go get it. And once we get it, we want to go ahead and get the body of it. And then we're going to stick the body into that transient. So once this gets set and we're now in our transient, when this runs again, this is going to be equal to true, and we're going to skip this. And so WP remote get never gets called and until another 12 hours. So in 12 hours, Nicole will be the first person on the site. She goes, and it's been 12 hours, and this happens again. But then Chris goes to the website, and it's not going to run because it's now been set for another 12 hours. And Dylan brought this up, is that even though it's expired, it doesn't get rid of the actual data. So as a developer, you want to keep that in mind and go through. If you know that your transients are always going to be 12 hours, you can set up a WP cron for every 12 hours to also go through and delete the old stuff. But if you set this over and over again, it will always set it with the latest value. So it's okay if you're always just going to be using the same one and you're always saving back to it. But by putting all this together, we can then run this in a much safer way. You're not going to hit that API all the time. And there's some other considerations to that, in that some APIs don't let you hit them as often as you would like to. Just because you can call an API 10,000 times a minute doesn't mean that the API will let you do that. And they will just shut down your API keys and your site's not going to work. So respecting the APIs is important, because then that way, the company's not going to shut you down for it. So once we have that information, we can now actually make use of it. We can create a post in WordPress using the different commands to do that. Or you can just display them on a front end in a widget. You can do a short code that would be like dribble shot, and you can stick it in a post. And what this would look like is that inside of that dribble result, we have that, step back one second. Is that normally you get back this huge JSON blob. WP remote retrieve body will actually turn it into an array for you. And so you don't have to go take that JSON, turn it into an array, and go parse it yourself. It'll do it for you. So we can actually get to the shots really quickly by just going to dribble results and then brackets shots. That gives us an array of all of our images. We're then going to do for each on all of the shots, and for each shot we're just going to output an image with the image teaser URL and the shot title. And really this is up to you as a developer to put them in a list, put them in into different ways of a modal window or whatever you want to do. And now you have full access to all the dribble shots that you would have right there in your code. And so you could wrap this whole thing in a plugin, release it as a premium plugin, or put it into the plugin repository. And there's a couple of them out there that if you want to check this one out, there's actually not a really good dribble API plugin out there yet. There's a lot of people who have tried to make them, but they're kind of old. But this kind of thing gets really exciting because this is just for dribble, but this you could do with tweets. You could do this with really anything. If you go out there and find an API, it works the exact same way. Any questions?
You do it all over again.
All over again.
You have multiple APIs that you're calling on a page, and they all are set to expire at the same time. Is there kind of a...
You have to manage that yourself. So that's only if you're using transients. If you're using transients, you don't have to use transients at all to use APIs in WordPress. It's just managing whether or not you're calling them all the time. Because the interesting thing about APIs is sometimes you have to make more than one call to get to what you want. You have to first, in my case, with this, is how do I get this number 35353? I have to actually make a call to the list of users to find out who I am, take that number, stick it in that URL to get my shot. So that would actually have required 2 different calls. And I know that my ID is never going to change, so we could probably store my ID forever, but then store my shots only for 12 hours or 4 hours or whatever that might be.
And This API, I assume, returns expires headers. Would it be a good idea to trust those expires headers automatically when setting the
You
transient
might.
expiration?
I haven't done that, but that's a good point. So a lot of APIs, those headers that I was talking about that come back, sometimes they say when the data will be expired or if anything has changed. And you can use those as well. And a lot of APIs try to get you to do that because it's less intensive on their side. I think you could rely on those, and you could just take that number and stick it in the transient as a variable instead of setting it yourself. But it just depends, because some APIs just ignore that stuff completely.
I have a question. Is this working?
Yeah.
Where does the get transient, where does it store its data? Is it database file or is it memory?
It's stored in WP Meta, correct?
WP options.
WP options, yeah. So it's in
By
the
default.
database.
Okay.
So whatever that is that you're sticking in there, you should definitely keep in mind that that big blob is going into the database. So you don't have to store the whole thing. You could go in and get the information you want from the blob and store just that. You could go get just the ID from the user and store just that as a different option, things like that. So you do want to keep in mind how much stuff you're storing, how often you're getting and setting that as well.
Plugins can change that too, like a caching plugin might store it in using memcached or something like that.
Awesome. Any other questions? Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin.